I never had a wife. The lonely rancher who protected a widow and her children. The dusk lay thick across the plains, a purple veil pulled low over the horizon, when Elias Monroe guided his horse along the ridge that overlooked the Whitfield homestead. From up there, the place seemed small, fragile as a matchbox against the sweep of land. Its fence posts bent from years of weather, its roof patched with tin that glimmered faintly in the dying light. Smoke drifted from the chimney, thin and hesitant, as though afraid to draw too much attention. Elias sat his horse in silence, watching, his hat brim shadowing his eyes, his face lined by wind and time. He had long ago become part of the landscape himself, a man carved from dust and solitude, and if anyone in town spoke of him at all, it was with suspicion, with a shake of the head and a muttered phrase. He never had a wife. Clara Whitfield was not thinking of Elias that evening. Not yet. She stood at her porch with her hands wrapped tight around the handle of the lantern, the glow spilling across her widow's dress, faded now from too many washings. Her boy Thomas sat on the steps with his shoulders drawn tight, trying to look braver than he felt, while little Mary clutched at her mother's skirts, her eyes wide as the prairie night gathered. It had been 6 weeks since Clara buried her husband under the cottonwoods, 6 weeks since the town that once nodded politely now whispered when she passed. She had heard the words, burdened, helpless, foolish to stay on land too harsh for a woman alone. The words clung to her as much as the dust in her hem. The coyotes had come closer that night, their yips and low howls circling the homestead, testing the fences, testing her nerve. Thomas had tried to bar the chicken coop, but his hands trembled when he lifted the latch. Clara had raised the lantern high, her heart drumming in her ears. Though she knew the thin glow could do nothing to drive off teeth and hunger, she whispered to herself that she could endure, because she had to, because her children's faces left her no other choice. Yet deep inside, beneath the steel she forced across her voice, lived the creeping certainty that the town was right. She could not manage alone. Elias saw the movement near her fence, the flicker of beasts darting in and out of the light, and he slid down from his saddle, without a word, rifle in hand. He walked slow, boots sinking into the soft earth, until his shape emerged from the darkness, like a figure summoned by need rather than invitation. A single shot cracked the silence, sharp as lightning, and the coyotes scattered into the night. The echo rolled across the land, then left only the sound of Clara's quickened breathing. She turned at once, the lantern shaking in her grip, to find him standing by the fence, smoke still curling from his rifle barrel. He tipped his hat slightly, his face unreadable in the dim glow. "They won't trouble you tonight," he said, his voice low, carrying a roughness like gravel dragged across wood. Clara felt heat rise in her chest, half gratitude, half defiance. "I didn't ask for your help," she said, though her words lacked force. "I know," Elias answered simply, then turned back toward his horse. He mounted without looking at her again, and the sound of his departure faded into the distance, leaving her lantern to sputter alone against the wide dark. The next morning, Thomas found a new water bucket by the well, iron-bound and sturdy. He ran his hands over it with wonder, but Clara only pressed her lips tight, refusing to name the giver. Still, when Mary placed a wildflower on the fence post nearest the road that night, Clara did not stop her. In town, the whispers grew louder. Men at the saloon leaned back in their chairs, spitting tobacco into sawdust, remarking how Elias Monroe kept circling that widow's place. Strange fella near 40, never had a wife, never sought one neither, one said. Another chuckled darkly. Maybe he don't know what to do with one. The laughter stung Elias where he sat alone in the corner, though he showed no sign. He drained his whiskey slow and left before their words could stick deeper. Solitude was armor, but even armor could grow heavy. Clara bore her own share of judgment. At the general store, she asked for credit to buy flour, her voice quiet but steady. The shopkeeper shifted, uneasy, muttering about uncertain prospects and no man to vouch for her. When Elias, passing through, reached out to lift a heavy sack to her wagon, Clara bristled. "I can carry it myself," she snapped, though the strain in her arms had already shown otherwise. Elias set it down in the wagon bed with no reply, only a nod before stepping aside. Her cheeks burned as she drove away, torn between resentment and shame. That night, Rain beat down in silver threads, rattling the shingles. Clara woke to the barn door banging in the storm. She pulled on her shawl, ready to face the mud, only to find, come morning, that the door had been mended with fresh nails, the wood braced strong. She traced the work with her fingertips, her throat tight. There had been no knock, no word, only the quiet labor of someone who believed action spoke louder than comfort. Thomas began to hover near Elias when chance allowed, watching the rancher mend fences, curiosity outweighing the shyness his mother carried. One afternoon, Elias showed the boy how to whittle a stick into the shape of a horse, slow strokes of the knife peeling curls of wood. Thomas's eyes glowed as he held the rough figure, and for the first time in weeks, Clara saw a spark of light in him that grief had dimmed. Her heart clenched. She wanted to thank Elias, but when their eyes met across the corral, words failed her. She looked away, her pride still raw, her grief still tender. It was then that Jed Carter returned to town. A drifter turned hired hand, his mouth full of spite and his eyes full of calculation. He had little but meanness to spend, and he spent it freely. When he heard of Clara's struggle, he saw opportunity. Land's too much for her, he told the men at the saloon. Best she sell before it goes to waste. Maybe I'll make her an offer she can't refuse. The chuckles that followed held no warmth. Soon after, Clara found a slaughtered chicken laid across her porch step, its blood seeping into the wood. Mary screamed, Thomas froze, and Clara stood stricken, rage and fear warring inside her. That night she sat with her shotgun across her lap, though her hands trembled so badly she could hardly steady it. Near midnight, the glow of a lantern approached, and she nearly pulled the trigger before recognizing the figure. Elias stepped into her yard, his face set. He looked at her, then at the children behind her. "You're not alone," he said, leaving the lantern on her porch. His presence filled the night more surely than any wall could. Days later, as the sun fell behind the hills, Jed Carter and two of his men rode to Clara's place. Their laughter carried ahead of them, coarse and mean, as they dismounted and strode toward the porch. Clara stood tall, shotgun in hand, though her knees weakened under her skirt. Thomas moved to stand beside her, but she pushed him gently back. Jed smirked, tipping his hat with mockery. "Evening, widow. Time's come to sign that claim over. Place like this ain't fit for a woman and brats. Best hand it to men who can use it." "I'll do no such thing," Clara said, though her voice wavered. Jed stepped closer, his boots grinding the earth. "Don't make it harder than it has to be. Papers already drawn. Just your name needed." It was then Elias stepped from the barn shadows, rifle in hand, his face carved in stone. The men halted, surprise flickering before mockery returned. "Look here," Jed drawled, "the loner himself. You think standing by her makes her yours? You never had a wife, Monroe. Everyone knows it." Elias's eyes held steady, his voice quiet yet cutting through the dark. "Maybe I never had a wife," he said, "but I know what it means to keep a promise." The night hung heavy. Wind rustled the grass, and the lantern flame shivered. Jed shifted, hand brushing his holster, but Elias raised the rifle slow and deliberate, the steel gleaming. His stance was not that of a braggart or a drunk, but a man rooted deep, unmovable as the earth itself. The stillness stretched, taut as a wire ready to snap. Clara's breath caught. Mary whimpered. Thomas clenched his fists. Jed's smirk faltered. He spat into the dirt, muttered a curse, then jerked his head toward his man. "Ain't worth it," he said, though the anger in his eyes promised the matter was not done. They mounted, their horses kicking dust as they retreated into the dark, leaving the yard in silence but for the hammering of hearts. Elias lowered his rifle, exhaling slow, as though he had been holding his breath for years. He turned toward Clara, who stood still on the porch, her hands shaking. Tears welled unbidden, not of weakness but the weight finally shared. She stepped down, lantern light falling across both their faces, and for the first time since her husband's death, she felt something more than despair. She felt seen. Elias looked at her, his voice soft but certain. "They won't trouble you again tonight." She nodded, words tangled in her throat, gratitude and something deeper burning within. Mary reached out, slipping her small hand into Elias's, and the rough rancher froze, then closed his fingers gently around hers. It was a gesture so simple, yet it carried the weight of unspoken vows. The dawn came pale and tender, washing the prairie in gold. Clara brewed coffee. Her children gathered close, and Elias sat with them on the porch, his hat in his lap. No declarations were made, no promises spoken, yet in the silence between them, something rooted itself. Trust, fragile but real, like a seed taking hold after the storm. And for the first time, when the town whispered the widow and the loner, their words mattered less than the truth that had begun to live quietly beneath her roof and his watchful eyes. Because sometimes love was not claimed in ceremony or shouted in words. Sometimes it was found in the man who said he never had a wife until he chose to stand, unyielding, for a family that was not his own but had become the very center of his world.